Okay, let's start. Hello, everyone. Welcome. And we are going to call this meeting to order now. It is 7:04 on March 2nd, 2023. And this is a joint public meeting of the City of Portland Police Accountability Commission, subcommittees on board membership and oversight agency. My name is Victoria, and I will be the main facilitator today. But we also have the second facilitator, Corinne. That's her first meeting, and we're very excited and welcome her tonight. If the Spanish language interpreters, Talia and Maria, can please give the information on the Spanish language interpretation.
Muy buenas noches a todos. Vamos a empezar esta reunión. Son las 7:04 de la noche del día 2 de marzo del 2023. Esta es una reunión pública de la Comisión de Responsabilidad Policial que se va a hacer, y esta reunión va a ser grabado y también vamos a tener interpretación en español disponible si es que lo necesita.
Muchas gracias, Talia. The city also offers ASL interpretation, which is being provided by Mary and Christiana. Please pin the video feed to see their interpretation throughout the meeting. The closed captioning is turned on in Zoom as another means of assistance. But please note that this is an automatic captioning services and it is not always accurate. The city supports access to meetings of the Police Accountability Commission and can provide other language support as well. Please email in advance of future public meetings, either as a response to a public meeting notice or directly to policeaccountability@portlandoregon.gov to ask for other access assistance, including interpretation into other languages. This meeting is a public meeting subject to the City of Portland Administrative Code and Oregon State Law and is being recorded. For this meeting, the chat function is enabled for commission members to communicate with each other. Members of the public will be able to ask questions using Zoom's Q&A feature. As the commissioners are presenting and or discussing things, if attendees have questions, please feel free to submit them through the Q&A. We hope to use this feature to help guide our conversation during the meeting and future meetings agenda topics. This is not a chat function, but actually designed to ask questions and get responses. Not all questions will be answered during the meeting, but if answered, both that question and answer will be visible to you and will become part of the meeting record. To access this feature, click on the Q&A icon in the middle of your screen. Now I will pass it to the co-chairs for the land acknowledgement.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Obi Agwoju, and I am one of the co-chairs for the board membership subcommittee. I'll be doing the land acknowledgement. The PAC currently uses the land acknowledgement on display at City Hall, which is: we acknowledge that the rivers, lakes, streams, and lands of the lower Willamette River rest upon the occupied territories of the Multnomah, Wasco, Cowlitz, Cathlamet, Clackamas, Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapia, Malala, and many other tribes. We recognize the many villages, traditions, cultures, and relationships that existed along the river since time immemorial. We recognize these tribes stewarded these lands and rivers since time immemorial for future generations. We recognize and undertake responsibility for the destruction of the river and land, traditional food sources, sacred places, and multifaceted ways of life. We acknowledge the economic and social values that enabled the harm to the river, including systemic racism, classism, and other systems of oppression that perpetuated harm against Black, Indigenous, and immigrant communities along the river. With this acknowledgement, we commit to honoring and learning from the past and working towards a more equitable and sustainable future for the lower Willamette River. We commit to seeking solutions that acknowledge the inequities of past socioeconomic policies and the harm done to people and our relationships to these lands and waters.
Thank you, Co-Chair Obi. Now we're gonna review together the community agreements. Can you please share this slide? What we will do is each of us will read it and think about it and meditate about it. And then there is 3 pages I will ask the question. Next page, please. Oh, the other page.
You're gonna go backward 4 slides. Okay, a couple more. That one.
Thank you. That's perfect. Thank you. Next page, please. Okay. If you notice that a conversation is coming close to violating a community agreement, please call your fellow commission members and gently and with compassion. If you are calling in, please take a moment to consider how you can best participate in the space while still respecting the community agreements and making a space for everyone. Do we all commit to following the community agreements for today's meeting and to gently calling in our college and collaborators if needed? And if you can show me your thumbs or your hands that you agree. Thank you. Now I will pass it to the co-chairs to discuss the timeline.
Hello, it's Ajay Mechi, co-chair of the Oversight Staff Committee. And this meeting is part of the Police Accountability Commission's structure and details phase of work, which focuses on the form of the new system. Future phases of work will develop how the new system relates to the rest of the city government and the transition plan from our current system to the new one. The commission will present all proposed changes to the city council later in 2023 for their consideration and approval. This slide shows the outcome documents for the structure and details phase based on the agenda and scope approved by the commission. The 2 subcommittees meeting jointly today are focused on the first 2 items, how the board membership is structured and how the staff that make up the agency supporting the oversight board is structured. And this, did it go already? Yeah, this slide is the current project plan for the structure and details phase of the Police Accountability Commission's work. It will be updated as needed throughout this phase of work. This slide is for members of the public to be able to understand how the commission gets from now through the end of the phase, which focuses on identifying areas of agreement among commission members as to the form the new system will take. Today's meeting covers the 2 boxes surrounded by a red border on the left of the screen, which I think it should be the next slide. Or maybe not. Following today, here are the upcoming meetings of the PAC. So the subcommittee on board membership will meet next Thursday, March 9th, and either March 25th or March 27th. The subcommittee on oversight agency will meet on Monday, March 13th, and again, either March 27th or 28th. And the full commission will meet next on March 30th. And we have also have upcoming community engagement events, including a midday event on March 22nd.
We're one slide behind still. Go. Yeah, that's the calendar.
Yeah, that's the one. And today's meeting agenda includes introductions of members of both subcommittees, discussing the mandate and context for each subcommittee's work, open discussion on the areas which overlap between the two subcommittees, which is why we're having a joint subcommittee meeting and then starting to frame each subcommittee's work. Today's meeting agenda also includes public comment. Next slide. And I'll and the next slide again. I will pass it back to facilitators.
Thank you, Co-Chair Jay. First, the subcommittee will review the commission's mandates as it relates to the issue and the subcommittees itself, as well as its timeline and how it relates to other subcommittees. For this part, I will pass it to the staff.
Thank you. Yeah. If you could please stop the screen share. Thank you. So we're gonna quickly talk about the commission's mandate as it relates to this issue area, these issue areas, as well as the timeline and how it relates to other subcommittees. Just quickly going to screen share this document here. So the commission was set up by resolution 37527, as well as 37548. Resolution 37527 is from the City Council, tasking the commission to craft and provide City Council with recommendations for the details for establishing a new police oversight system and with developing the structure and processes of the new oversight system and ensuring that the requirements of the framework within the city charter are met. We'll be looking at the charter a little bit later on. The exhibit to this resolution includes that the commission can invite experts to testify and answer questions, including subject matter experts, police officers, and law enforcement experts. It also mandates the commission to work with the city attorney's office to ensure that recommendations comply with collective bargaining and other legal requirements. The second resolution, 37548, tasks the commission with writing out procedures, powers, definitions, and other details outlined in its exhibit. And the exhibit has a lot more detail here. There's a lot of color coding. So the things that are relevant here are for orange is for board membership. So a definition, the commission has to develop a definition of for cause, what the reasons are that an oversight board member could be removed, as well as the size of the oversight board, its appointment terms, reappointment, if it's allowed or not, board compensation, if any, and expected workload. And then just to run through this a second time, looking at the green this time, on the oversight agency side, there are three parts here that relate to that as well. Information on the board's operational budget, what level of involvement other parts of the city government may have with the board and interactions with the rest of the city, and then also staff hiring and onboarding is partially related to that as well. More specific to the subcommittee's meeting today, that's everything we've just looked at is what the commission is tasked to do. The commission created subcommittees on February 9th to address these specific issue areas. The content for it was developed, it's the left and middle column here, was developed specific to each subcommittee. We're going to talk about this a little bit more later on. Each subcommittee is likely to have this joint meeting and roughly 4 additional meetings. These meetings will be spaced relatively far apart as during March, more of the reporting and transparency subcommittee will be scheduled. And then there'll be more frequent meetings of these subcommittees in early April. These 2 subcommittees may interact, as some of the decisions made in one may affect the ability of the other, which we'll talk about in just a little while as well. And then I wanted to quickly mention that we will be looking at the charter as well, and the same color coding here applies. This is the charter section approved by the voters in November 2020. The orange section relates to board membership. I won't read it all here, but it does include items like board members are approved by council. The board needs to be diverse and representative of the community, as well as several categories reflecting those most affected by police and policing. Restrictions on those who are currently employees of a law enforcement agency serving on the board. And then one of the goals of the board is to remove barriers for individual board members to participate. Similarly, I won't read everything in green, but it's what relates to the staff side, including the budget. There's a minimum budget requirement, a staff that includes investigators, which reports to a director, and that director reports to the board and is considered a bureau director. The office needs to be located outside of a city facility as well. And the only other thing that I'll review under the sort of review portion of the agenda before passing it back to facilitators for discussions is something that the PAC approved in the past, which is relevant here, and it's the PAC values and goals. At the end of every process that includes developing a document, the commission makes a decision and ideally comes to consensus or a vote to approve that document. And before doing that, the commission reviews its values and goals. That process is usually done at the end, but at the end of the last phase, staff was asked to show this up at the beginning of the process as well, so you can kind of see what the goals that the commission already set for itself are. And that was done 11 months ago. And so the 6 values are here in the leftmost column. There are goals that relate to it, and then there are specific success criteria. The orange ones relate to the board membership. There's just the one. It's an accountability system that is composed of residents, which reflect the diversity of the community and those individuals directly affected by the criminal legal system. There are a couple parts here that relate to green, which is the staff, a system that is humane for the people going through it and the people administering it, and a system that employs professional skilled in harm reduction throughout the entire process of police accountability. There's also a partial relation here in terms of protecting sources from retaliation. And finally, all the yellow items are things that are sort of across multiple phases of work and multiple issue areas. These documents are all on the website, so we won't go through all of them here. Just wanted to mention that they're worth looking at as well. And with that, I will pass it back to the facilitators for the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, staff. We will now move into discussions. We ask you to follow our normal discussion rules. Please be brief each time you speak. Even though you can speak multiple times, please be facilitator. And remember that we use a weighted stack in our discussions. And finally, please be forward-looking in your comments. What we're gonna do is we have a couple questions, and the first question is brief. The question is, what are the principles that members would like to see reflected in the subcommittee on board memberships work? Will the co-chairs, Obi and Tirsa, like to get the discussion started?
Sure. Thank you, Victoria. So I guess will try to answer the question from my point of view. I would like to see, and this has also previously been mentioned before, but I would like to see people, board members that represent various communities in Portland. yeah, to have a diverse group of voices form the board. That's something I would like to see.
Thank you, Co-Chair Tirsa. Co-Chair Obi?
Yeah, thank you. I completely agree with my co-chair. I'm having a diverse body of people in the board who would represent Portland and Oregon. Additionally, looking being a little bit forward looking, having a board that has the ability to review cases in a collegial as well as appropriate manner and an efficient manner too, and making sure that our board makeup kind of inspires confidence in the system in general. We will have to look at board membership that's coming up and discussing hopefully with members of the community too of what they would like to see and what will end up working in regards to something we looked at in the last session of having, or in the last phase of work, having approval to certain levels of access and making sure that board members are able to do that, and that'll be discussed later on. But a diverse board would be fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Co-Chair Obi. Another member, another commissioner would like to answer the question, and I can repeat the question. What are the principles the members would like to see reflected in the subcommittee on board memberships work? Yes, Commissioner Angie.
Thank you. I want to acknowledge and appreciate the fact that when this commission was put together, that they had very, I don't want to say criteria, but there was, each one of us represents a different, or not each one of us represents a different section of the population. But I think that I do like the way that it was very specific in that, there are people on this commission that I think defining what we're looking for as diversity is very important, and putting that into this document is very important. I really, I want to see diversity in age. I would like to see younger people on this. I would like to see older people on this, people with experience, but I want to be able to define that, because I think making it more specific is going to get a lot more diversity out of what we're looking for out into this new board that we're going to create. So
Thank you, Commissioner Angie. Commissioner Casey?
I just sort of want to add to what's already been said, that I think that in addition to sort of diversity of background and experience, I think something that's been really helpful in this process is having a diversity of sort of knowledge and skills, having people who are coming to the process from positions of being advocates, organizers, cop watchers, attorneys, a lot of different kinds of work that they have done previously that they are then able to bring in and sort of make available to the other board members, so that when we have questions or ideas or anything, we have people who can come to us with knowledge that we don't have, and sort of help fill in the gaps. So I think that's another thing that has been really important to me in this process, and I think could be really useful to this board.
Thank you, Commissioner Casey. Okay. Anybody else would like to answer that question? Or everybody from the committee answer that question? Okay. Oh, Commissioner Monica?
Yeah, I think the part that I would like to see is ensure that the purpose of the board is to be representative and advocate to the community and not to the police department, right? It's much of the systems we've had in place have always been there in a way, didn't get started that way, but got turned into another form of protection of police and police power. And if we could incorporate into the organization a way to prevent that from happening, I would like that to happen.
Thank you, Commissioner Monica. Before we pass to the next item, is there anybody else would like to add something to the question? Okay, then, I forgot to do the introductions, and as any phase, the commissioners and the members and the co-chairs need to introduce themselves to the public and to the community that's participating. And we will do that now. If co-chair Obi and co-chair Jay and co-chair Tirsa would like to start introducing themselves and then pass it to the rest of the members of the co-chair and of the subcommittee, and then we go to the next subcommittee. Please.
Okay. So good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming. My name is Obi Gwoju. I am one of the commission members and one of the co-chairs for the board membership once again. Joined in August and I've lived in Portland for 3.5, going on 4 years. Just want to say thank you and enjoy working with everyone here. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Tirsa Oriana. I use she, her pronouns, and I am excited about, well, I'm also a subcommittee co-chair with OB for the board membership. And I'm excited to be in the subcommittee.
Thank you. The members of the subcommittee can introduce themselves, please.
Hello, I'm Cameron Brown. I use he, him pronouns. I just started here in, I think, early January, so I'm just still trying to wrap my brain around everything we're talking about. So thanks.
Thank you.
My name is Casey Lewis. I am an attorney person with lived experience of mental illness, and starting pretty soon, I'm going to be working as a public defender as well. And I am a member of, I believe, both subcommittees.
Thank you, Commissioner Casey. Commissioner Angie?
I am Angie Tomlinson. I go by she, her pronouns, and I am a member of the commission and have lived experience with police violence. And thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Now the co-chairs of the subcommittee and oversight agency, Commissioner Ajay and co-chair Ajay and co-chair Dan, can you introduce yourselves, please?
Sure, I'll start. I'm Ajay Mechi, co-chair of the Oversight Staff Committee, and I use she, they pronouns. And was there something else missing? I think that was it. Glad to be here.
Thank you. Co-chair Dan?
And I'm Dan Handelman. I use he, him pronouns, and I came to this work from being a cop watcher and an activist, which I still am. And I was previously the co-chair of the subcommittee on basically the officer accountability, which means the flow of work that gets from the beginning of the process to the end of the process. I think that'll help us as we're designing the staff in this phase. So we've already heard from one of our members. So the other are Commissioner Arce and Commissioner Iona, I think.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Monica Arce. I use she, her pronouns, and I have been part of this process from the very beginning with a lot of people here. Very excited to be part of the almost the last steps of this giant undertaking, and excited to be part of the Oversight Agency subcommittee. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Monica. Commissioner Debbie?
Hi, I'm Debbie Iona, she, her. I'm on the agency subcommittee, and also the co-chair of the Reporting and Transparency Subcommittee. And I came to this this work through the League of Women Voters, my involvement with League of Women Voters.
Thank you, Commissioner Debbie. And as Commissioner Casey introduced himself, he's on both committees. Thank you very much for all your services and all your service and all the work that you do. Now, if somebody wants to answer the first question, I guess we're already past that. Then we can go to the next question. And the next question is similar. What are the principles that members would like to see reflected in the subcommittee of oversight agency work? Commissioner Ajay or Commissioner Dan, would you like to start the discussion?
Yeah, I can start. One thing that when me and Dan discussed some of the documents we'll be going over, one thing that came up a lot was thinking about some of the lessons learned from COVID, and I have somewhat of a background in like health equity, and thinking about how even people that are really amazing, that really care, that have compassion, can get compassion fatigued if they're overworked. So thinking about how the system is structured in such a way that it's not too burdenous on the staff, so they're just too tired or distracted to be able to do their jobs well. So, one of the things we talked about is something like, there's this idea of Dunbar's number, like what is the maximum amount of relationships a human being can have, before all of those relationships start to suffer. And looking at like current caseloads and comparing those to maybe like how they might be different or similar in this new system. So that was something that definitely came up, was thinking about, how this work, especially thinking about the advocates, they should be trauma informed, but also their work needs to be trauma informed, because it's hard to be trauma informed to someone else when you're having trauma inflicted upon you, so creating some kind of mechanism, like just thinking about like this kind of larger overall, like what it means to have like a workplace that is has sort of somewhat of a protection built in. I don't know if you want to add something, Dan or Commissioner Handelman.
Oh, sure. Well, I don't know if what I'm about to say is principles or what, but in terms of what we're doing, like the big picture of what we're about to start embarking on now in this phase, is that it was mentioned before that before we were working on the function of what is this system going to do, and now we're going to be looking at the form. So how do we make that happen? So we gave all these gigantic tasks to both the board and the staff about what has to happen in terms of once a case comes in, what's going to happen with that, how much outreach is going to go to the community, how many, and now we're kind of in discussion about how many reports are going to get given to the community. So we have all this work that we're putting on people's shoulders, and I just want to make sure that we, A, don't lose sight of those things that we think are really important that we've already discussed, but B, also don't end up with either compassion fatigue or also burning people out, which I think people on this commission can relate to.
Thank you, Co-Chair Dan. Somebody else? Yes, Commissioner Casey.
So I think one of the big challenges, not just for us, but for the actual standing up of the staffing for this, is going to be that this board is going to have sort of a policing and enforcement function over the police themselves. And how do we make sure that we are hiring and supporting people who have the necessary skill set to do that, while at the same time not just sort of recreating what we have already had, which is asking the police or people with background as police to police themselves, and having sort of those biases and those connections creep into the work and get rid of the level of objectivity that we need for this work. So I think that's going to be a subject of further discussion, is how do we make sure that the staff has the appropriate skills while at the same time making sure that their values are also the appropriate values for this kind of work.
Thank you, Commissioner Casey. Commissioner Angie?
Thank you. I agree with Commissioner Casey in that, we want to make sure that what we are putting forth starts with value, but also ends with value. And I think that going back to our values and goals, always thinking about those values and goals. And one of our main values was constant reevaluation and making sure that we are in line with where we want to be, because we can start off and have like this incredible commission, create this incredible board, but then 3 years down the line, who knows, different a different political wind, or people get fatigue and things happen. So I really want continual effectiveness. Yes, thank you so much. I want to bake that into the rules, because I want to make sure that they are constantly being reevaluated and performing at the most at what we were hoping for in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Angie. Co-Chair Aji?
Yeah, another thing that Commissioner Handelman and I spoke about was, and this has to do, I think, with Casey and also with, Angie, both of you were saying a little bit, was the idea of pipeline creation. And like, what does it mean to create like a framework that's always like empowering members of community to find out how they can get into these fields? Because like when it comes to tech, for example, like they don't trust that you're just going to magically, find Black and brown people that have these skills. They like build a pipeline. They work with schools and like create programs so they can diversify their force, because they know that like the people that are likely to get into these kind of things are not going to necessarily be the most diverse people. So in order to diversify the field, there's a pipeline that's created. And, I know tech is different, but I think there should also, as part of the community outreach, talk about the pipeline creation of jobs within, the oversight agency, and how to even get these jobs, what you even need to study and all those things, because that might not actually be clear to the public at all. And that's why, these things often remain like officers' friends and families, because like those are the only people that even like know how to even get into some of these like types of professions. So thinking about the pipeline.
Thank you, Co-Chair Ajay. Would you like to anyone add to this answer or share their ideas? No? Okay, we can pass to the next question. And these questions was on the main reasons why we did and what the PAC organized a joint meeting of these two committees at once. And remember, we put the discussion be brief, be facilitated, and be constructive. Thank you. This question is for everyone. And again, it's a very important, and we would like everyone to give their ideas. And remember, because we are so unique and different, there is no wrong answers. And that's exactly what you're here, because we need your unique idea and unique perspective. The question is, with relation to the overlapping issues, how would you like to see the subcommittees handle this as they work independently in future meetings? Yes, Co-Chair Dan?
Okay, well, we just had a pre-meeting a few minutes ago. I didn't realize this was going to be posed as a question, so I was kind of prepared to discuss what those areas overlap are, and I'm hoping that's okay. Particularly in my mind, one of the large areas of overlap has to do with the budget, which I think I want to go through what we have on paper for that. And another thing that came up in the previous phase that we recognized was that technically in Portland and in some other cities, the boards can tell the staff how to write their guidelines, and what I think we should contemplate whether we want that to happen. And so if that's going to be something that the board membership group says, oh yeah, we want the board to tell the staff, either to approve or to write the protocols for the staff, that's something that we're going to need to know when we're writing what the staff does. Does that make sense to everybody? You hear what I'm saying? So I just, I'm hoping that the board membership subcommittee can, and we can work together on that question, however we work that out. And then can I ask staff, can you put up the document that we worked on and bring up the page with the city budget, which is the next to last page? So I went to the city website and I found the IPR's current budget. They're slated for 14 full-time positions, and then including materials and whatever photocopies and what tech and other stuff, they have a budget of just under $3 million. And the number that's been thrown around for us is the 5% of the police bureau's budget. That's going to be the minimum. But you know how the city government works. If that's the minimum, that's probably what the oversight agency is going to get. That'll be around $12 million. And so if you do the math, that comes out to probably 56 full-time employee positions. They don't have to be full-time. That's something we're going to talk about. And by the way, we want to rename our subcommittee the Oversight Staff Subcommittee, so it doesn't have the same initials of the oversight of the officer accountability one. But in any case, there would be about 56 full-time positions. And then if you go to the next page, please, staff. I was kind of looking at the workload, which is another thing that we both have to think about, both subcommittees have to think about. So we, in the last phase, agreed that there would be investigations of almost every single kind of possible misconduct, unless it's incredibly minor, that would be done by the staff and then turned over to a hearing by the board. Right now, there are about 400 community complaints a year, and then there's 4 to 7 shootings a year, and then sometimes officers might want to use the system. But we'll say, for argument's sake, I'm going with the number 400, assuming a dismissal rate that's slightly lower than it is now, which is 43%, somewhere around 30%. That leaves about 280 complaints a year, and some of them are going to be resolved through a minimum, the officer being talked to by their supervisor at the request of the complainant and with their approval. But so we're thinking that there probably end up being about 200 full investigations a year. 200 full investigations a year. And even if if I get this materials from San Diego County, where what happens there is that the board is presented by the staff with a package of about 10 or 15 cases a month. They have one monthly meeting, and then they don't have full evidentiary hearings, which is something that we described in our last phase. So all in that one night, they go through about 10 or 12 cases, 10 to 15 cases, with a recommendation from the staff already what the findings should be. And I don't know if that's something that we want to happen here, but we have to think about how we are going to have enough people to hear all these different cases, not all on the same day. We described that we'd be panels of probably 5 people, and larger panels when there's a more serious case like a shooting, and how often they can meet without burning everybody out. So that's just something to think about in terms of how we're going to structure all this, and how that works with the staff and the board members. And as just as a reminder too of a discussion that we had when we were going over a workflow. One of the things that we talked about was having a board of 25 or 30 members, and that perhaps they might want to make some of those members be experts in the appeals, which is and yet another part of the process. So I haven't really broken down the full thing, but 200. If they have one business meeting a month where they discuss their policies and protocols and things that they want to reports they want to present and stuff like that, and then they have 3 other meetings a month that are hearings. I think that's somewhere between 5 and 7 cases a week. So we haven't really thought about these things. I just spent a little time on the last week or so thinking about that. So I just want to frame that, the conversation for both of our subcommittees, thinking about those. But the overall question that was that with the 56 full-time employees is that, we roughly, co-chair Amechi and I roughly sketched out what the staff might be made up of, and left about enough money for 6 full-time positions to pay for the board members. And I think what I've heard from other people that on this commission, and this one of the things that we have to talk about, is that we don't want to have them be full-time employees, because then they won't be community members anymore. They'll be full-time employees of the city. But there's also an idea that Commissioner Glenn put forward a couple of phases ago, that maybe they should be reimbursed in the same way that people are reimbursed when they do jury duty. So every, per case, they could get some money. And we don't know what the legalities of that with the city government are, but that's one thing to think about too, in terms of how we're going to split up this budget among the board and the staff. So I think those are the broad strokes that I want to kind of put out there for our overlap. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Co-Chair Dan. And I see that Commissioner Monica wanted to say something.
Yeah, I had my hand up because I keep thinking of this structure, and the actual staff, investigators, people that are hired and paid to do this incredibly hard work, putting all of this time and effort to do all of this work. And then there's this board that seems to be above them, that are made up of volunteer community members that are not going to be spending a lot of time understanding and the intricacies of this work, and seem to have a lot more voice and power than the actual staff. And it's that I think that's part of the issues with our structure and our general system in general in this world. Like, there's always this board present over everything that seems to be very disconnected from what is actually happening. So I'm concerned about that, right? That the board is going to meet only once every 2 weeks, or once a month, or once every how often, to make decisions on all of this work that was minutially, that was done for hours and hours and hours on end on these people that are already overworked and overstaffed. And, and I just want to put that out there, that maybe our system should be putting more time, effort, and power into the staff and the people actually doing the work, that rather than this board situation. But I know that, I'm not sure what that all means, or how to make that be less of a giant oversight dynamic over the actual people doing the work.
Thank you, Commissioner Monica. Yeah, Commissioner Casey.
I mean, I think part of that goes into one of the questions that Commissioner Dan sort of raised when he was talking about going through that document, which is, are the staff going to be presenting just sort of neutral information to the board and then saying, you do with this what you will, or are the staff going to be bringing recommendations to the board? Because I've certainly been sort of involved in systems where you have an oversight board, but really the majority of the work and sort of analysis and qualitative presentation is being done by the staff who have that time and expertise to do it. And the board's role is really more oversight, signing off on the work of the staff, and then if there is additional work or information that needs to be done, kind of directing the organization itself to go in that direction. But they are not necessarily the ones who are going to be, they are receiving a lot of expertise from the staff that they're leaning on a lot to make their decisions. And so I think that's going to be one of the decision points for us. And I think kind of one of the decision points we're talking about in the push and pull between these two subcommittees is how much of the power / responsibility do we want in the hands of the staff versus the board, and what does that then mean in terms of how we achieve our goals of sort of community participation and diversity and everything.
Thank you, Casey. That was so much better spelled out than what I was trying to say. Yes.
Thank you, Commissioner Casey. Who's next? What with relationship to the overlapping issues, how would you like to see the subcommittees handle this as they work independently? Co-chair Ajay?
Thinking about some of the things that were just brought up, which are really important points. I was just thinking about how OHA or Oregon Health Authority, like how they do their advisory councils, where usually, you know, there's a once a month board meeting, but usually there's people that are like in these subcommittees, and the subcommittees meet. So mostly, you know, people are meeting kind of like every 2 weeks, depending on how many subcommittees they're on. And so if a subcommittee is like community engagement, it's like they might have the staff might, you know, create the agenda for the meeting, like similar to how these meetings function, you know, propose an agenda, you know, board members can alter the agenda, they agree on the agenda, and then, you know, they have the meeting, and then there's sort of like an action plan or tasks that need to be doled out like to the staff. And yeah, I mean, that's one way of doing it. That, you know, it's not the only way, but just wanted to just throw that out there, that, you know, other government agencies, that's kind of how they function in terms of the relationship between sort of like an advisory thing or an oversight thing and the people actually like doing the work.
Thank you, Co-chair Ajay. What other things you will, oh yeah, staff?
Yeah, so in the officer accountability document, which the commission approved in February, there is some limited answers that have already been arrived at by the commission in terms of to what degree investigative staff recommendations would be used. The only place where it explicitly says that there's an action plan or proposed by the staff is on making sure that investigations end on time. It has to do with the timeline part of it. And then secondly, the working definition of due process that the commission put into that includes that the decision makers must act on their own independent consideration of the law and facts, and not simply accept the views of a subordinate such as the staff in arriving at a decision. Just wanted to flag this is something you've already partially addressed in a previous phase.
Thank you, staff. And I will pass it to Commissioner Angie.
Thank you. And thank you for that information, which I completely agree with. I think that it's going to be hard to include this in rules in our documents to keep this in the way that we're hoping to keep it, hoping to keep these board members involved, because I don't know about all of you, but I know that I've seen many boards that just show up on the day of the meeting, have no background really, and just really rely way too much. But I think we're also hoping that this is different, that we have members of this board that are affected by police violence, that have been advocates, that, that have the same backgrounds that all of us have and have a passion for this job. I mean, I think the key thing is to try to, I don't know how we put it into the rules to keep this board passionate about this work, but if there is some magic bullet that somebody can think of, please share it, because there's a lot of smart people here.
Thank you, Commissioner Angie. Commissioner Dan, Co-chair Dan.
Oh, I think Commissioner Lewis has his hand up first.
Okay, Commissioner Casey.
I think you actually had your hand up first, but I'm happy to go in either order. I mean, I think it's hard for me. I completely agree sort of in principle with Commissioner Dan's sort of idea of saying, well, we don't necessarily want this to be a full-time job, because we want it to be people who are still members of the community, who are, living their lives and have that experience that they can bring into it as well. At the same time, just as I'm thinking about the workload, I mean, at the very least, it's a part-time job. When you have all these complaints coming in, I mean, when they're looking at shootings, I can imagine that being a full meeting or possibly multiple meetings. And then even when we're looking at, quote unquote minor complaints, we don't want people to feel like they're just being treated like the board is sort of, doesn't consider what happened to them to be important. And if we don't give the board enough time to really consider those things, then I think that will be difficult to avoid. And then I know it's a problem that we've seen in our state legislature, that we have sort of again, quote unquote citizen legislature. And what that really means is we don't pay legislators enough for that to be a full-time job. And so we've lost a lot of diversity in our legislature because of that. And a lot of the people who are able to serve in our legislature are people who are independently wealthy or retired or otherwise sort of able to do that work. And we definitely don't want this board to end up like that. So I do think one of the ways that we keep people engaged is to pay them appropriately so that they don't feel like their time is not valued. And then I think one of the other ways that we keep them engaged is by making sure that their work is not going to waste, by making sure that this entire, by doing the work that we're doing here and making sure that this commission is actually empowered to get results for the things that it does.
Thank you, Commissioner Casey. And Commissioner Dan?
Yeah, so kind of, as we're churning through this question of how we're going to keep people engaged and passionate, that's a great question, Commissioner Tomlinson. I wish there's a magic wand for that. When I say 3 to 7 cases a week, it could be that the different panels each meet on a different day of the week, and everybody meets once a week. That's still a lot. It could be that one panel has 3 to 5 cases, but again, as Commissioner Lewis was just saying, that you have to read the documents. You have to perhaps listen to the tapes. And if it's a deadly force case, that's probably going to be the only case you hear that week, right? But having enough people on the board will make it so that everybody doesn't have to spend full time on it. I hope. I think that's part of what is envisioned by what we did in the last phase. And in terms of the staff giving a proposed finding to the board, I find it can cut both ways, because it can help make things go faster, but it also can take away people's ability to do their own independent judgment. So when the CRC right now, when they hear an appeal, what I have hoped that they would do is that they would take the original findings and cover up with tape, and then read the whole file and say, this is what I think the finding should be, and then peel it back off and see what the recommended finding is. So that way they made up their own mind, but then they can see what the staff said. So that's just, one way to handle it. But I guess I'm getting a little too into the weeds here, but but it is a big question. Like, I think the whole vision of this that Commissioner Hardesty had when she put it on the ballot was, we want a community-driven system where the community is running the stuff, and the community is hiring the director and can basically say, this is what we want to happen, and which is not something we've experienced in this city ever with Oversight. Thank you.
Thank you, Co-Chair Dan. I will pass it to Commissioner Debbie and then to staff. Commissioner Debbie?
Thank you. So one thing I think we need to keep in mind about going back to Commissioner Monica's comment about the relationship between the agency and the community board is, in this case, the board hires the director. And when I interviewed the person who's the head, or he was the interim director of the Oakland Police Oversight Agency, it was really interesting to hear him talk, because he's there at the it's up to their board whether or not he has a job. And they've been through a few of them already. And it was pretty clear that he was very deferential to what the board wanted to do, because he knows that his job counts on that. So I think that might make for a little bit of an interesting dynamic in our system compared to other agencies where they have some sort of a board, but the head of the agency isn't necessarily hired by the board. So I think that's kind of an interesting connection between our two subcommittees. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Debbie. Staff?
Yeah, so I think the premise of the question around this is that there's a finite total amount of money that is at minimum the 12.5 million using current police bureau budget projection for the 5%. Some of that money is going to be spent on things other than personnel, and some of it is going to be spent on personnel that is mandated under the charter, which is the investigations. And without necessarily getting into this percentage will go to this, because that's probably going to get figured out later by the oversight board itself to some degree, that the relative weight that the commission wants to give to that there's not necessarily a way to do all the advocates at full-time staffing and all of the mediators as full-time staffing and a full-time salary for the members. And so what is the relative, the preference that you have between those appears to be part of the question. And if there's a comparative, this is more important to do than that might help in terms of guiding one or both subcommittees. And that's part of the reason this question was formulated. So I don't know if that's at all helpful in terms of framing the question, but yeah, thank you.
Thank you, staff. Up there, listen, yeah, Commissioner Casey?
So I think just based on that, and really at the brainstorming, not sold on anything that's even coming out of my own mouth yet stage, I tend to lean towards the having a larger board that's working less model, where we would have a large pool of board members from which to draw on to have smaller groups who meet more regularly and can take the time and energy necessary to really look closely at a few complaints that they have for that month, but are sharing that work across a large group of people. And then maybe you bring the entire board together much more irregularly for decisions that need to be made, such as hiring a director or major policy choices that are being made, because then you can have more representation. You can pay people less because they're doing less work and it's taking up less time. And that also means that they can have their lives outside of the board, and we can have more diversity and experience coming in that way too. So that's kind of what strikes me immediately off of the back of sort of the statements that we've just heard.
Thank you, Commissioner Casey. Commissioner Monica?
Yeah, I agree. I see a board as somebody that can provide guidance, oversight, and large decision making, and the staff providing reports. How many investigations, how many were closed, what were the outcomes, and general information to a large board. And then the board can be separated into different subcommittees, right, that do different things as well. No, I do like that idea of separating the work. I'm worried about a very large board that meets very frequently to hear every single case,
Thank you. Would you like to add anything? We're going to break, but before we go into break, because after this, we're gonna pass to our next discussion items. Is there anything you would like to add for this question? Okay, then let's take a break. Let's take a 10 minutes break. Let's come back at 8:18. Come back. Thank you. We will continue with our meeting. And our next item on the agenda is we're gonna move into discussing the content this subcommittee will discuss, including the content just mentioned. We will have probably 15 minutes for each subcommittee. Then I will pass it to the co-chairs.
Okay, thanks for pulling that up. I was just looking for my document. So here's our agenda and scope for today. I mean, I don't know how much we're going to get through, but we'll try our best. We'll talk about board membership, number of members in the board, qualification of the new board members, recruitment, whether they're paid or unpaid, representation of specific impacted communities, the onboarding process and training, and selection and replacement of board members, appointment process, the term length, renewability of those terms, training requirements, quorum, and removal requirements. And I will pass it to my co-chair, Andelman.
So actually, Co-Chair Mechi, I think this is the other team's outline.
Oh my God, yes, you're right. Why am I reading? Sorry.
Yeah, that's so.
Sorry,
Ariana,
I was not, this is not even my committee. Sorry.
But you were doing such
so-
a good job, so there was no reason to stop. But yeah, we'll go through and we'll read the over the bullet points and there in the bullet points. There is information below, and this was awesomely created by Commissioner Handelman. But we can dots, excuse me, dots. And then if you have anything to say, please raise your hand, interject. Please give us what you think about it. But I'll just read the bullet points for this section, okay? So for other jurisdictions, makeup of the oversight board C1, the oversight body is large enough to be representative of the city's population. C2, board member makeup should reflect the demographic and geographic diversity of the community. C3, selection criteria for membership includes subject matter expertise. And you can tell that some of these things you guys already alluded to in your questions beforehand, if you're quickly reading through. C4, designated alternates for oversight body. I know we're reading through this quickly. Does anyone have any major questions or anything about that? And yeah, just please, I'm going to keep reading, but please stop me if I don't see it. D, selection of oversight board. D1, the oversight body's members are appointed by city council. D2, members of the oversight body have to agree to certain terms upon appointment and reappointment. D3, community members apply for oversight body membership, and applications are screened before passing them on to the appointing authority. D4, oversight body members are given training to exercise their duties on behalf of the public. E, terms of removal of oversight board members. E1, members serve staggered multi-year terms. E2, members may apply for renewal up to a total maximum length of service. Renewal applications are evaluated and considered by appointing authority. E3, the oversight body has defined criteria for automatic member removal. E4, the oversight body has defined authority and criteria for discretionary removal or referral to the appointing authority for removal. E5, members whose terms have expired, continue to serve until the replacement is appointed. For M is board compensation. M1, community members serving on the oversight board are compensated for their time and work. M2, community members serving on the Oversight Board are reimbursed for any expenses they incur as part of their public service. And internal structure. And 1, the oversight body is able to set both its bylaws and its other internal processes within broad parameters established in law. And 2, quorum. The oversight body may meet and make decisions when a majority of seated members are present, subject to a minimum threshold defined by law. And 3, the oversight body may establish and define its own officer positions from among its voting membership. And 4, the oversight body may establish and define its own committees or subcommittees which address different aspects of the oversight body's work. And 5, oversight body members are encouraged to vote with recusals in limited circumstances and/or abstentions discouraged. And now I'll pass it to my co-chair, Tirsa.
Thanks, Obi. Subject matter experts. J, oversight body membership selection. J1, oversight body selection criteria should reflect those most affected by policing. Proposed by Nico. And then the next section, barriers and best practices. So these were drawn from there. The current system relies heavily on volunteers and then does not provide them with sufficient support. And that's it. And in Portland City Charter, Section 210. Section 21002, nature of the board, and then Section 21003, restrictions on board membership. And so that's an overview of what was pulled from the agenda and scope framework, from structure and detailed space of work, and from city charter that are applicable to board membership.
Thank you, Co-Chair Tirsa and Co-Chair Obi. Is there questions or comments before we review the other subcommittee document? Any comment or question you may have? Yes, Commissioner Cameron?
Yeah, I was wondering what board members just, it said something there that they have to remain if someone finds placement.
Commissioner Cameron, I cannot hear you. There is some, I hear your voice comes and goes. Can you repeat it and see we can hear you better now that you took your camera out?
Oh, yes. What if a board member just quits and they're I saw something there that said that they couldn't and I don't quit, but they were until someone finds a replacement. But what if someone died or someone, just couldn't be on the board anymore. Is there, what happened?
Well,
Thank you, Commissioner Cameron. I will pass it to Co-Chair Obi.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Commissioner Cameron. I think there is a provision earlier for alternates that we will, I mean, nothing is set in stone, of course, but I think there will be some sort of provision for alternates, and that might be a little tie-in thing between the ending of someone's participation and the start of someone else's. If there was some sort of gap, or of course, someone dies, someone moves, someone has to quit for family reasons or something. There should be a way of we should have something written on paper to address that, to quickly address any vacancy, so we can meet the city's quorums and keep things going.
Thank you, Co-Chair Obi. Commissioner Debbie?
So I just want to follow up on the compensation for people on the board. So one thing I feel like I've heard someplace, I don't remember where, that if you pay people on volunteer boards and commissions, at least in the city, there's a certain threshold, and once you maybe pay them more, they cross over into being city employees. So my suggestion to the subcommittee is, see if you can talk to somebody in HR who maybe explain what the rules are, and that way, whatever proposal we come up with will actually be workable. So I just want to throw that out there. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Debbie. Staff?
Yeah, so to Commissioner Debbie's question, the commission's actually obligated to talk with the Bureau of Human Resources about the collective bargaining side. And so at some point, we are trying to figure out who the right person is to bring in from the human resources side. And that person could easily be asked the same question that was just raised as well. And that would probably fall under multiple parts of the PAC's work. But that's definitely something that can be done. The other point is that I can't speak to at what level of compensation one is considered an employee. However, there is a federal law called the Volunteer Protection Act, which protects from liability for anyone who is compensated $500 per year or less. So that's just something to keep in mind. And there is a link about that as it relates to advisory groups, but that may not be the exact same thing that Commissioner Debbie was talking about. Thank you.
Thank you, staff. Are there any more comments or questions before reviewing the other document? Okay, Co-Chair Obi?
Yeah, I'll just quickly say that there was a Q&A question in the audience, so thank you to the participant who stated that, about making sure that there's something about reimbursement for expenses. Definitely, we have that written in the document to look over. So we'll definitely take note of that. So thank you.
Thank you, Co-Chair Obi. Co-Chair Dan?
Yeah, I just getting back to Commissioner Brown's question. If in E3 it lists some of the reasons that a person might be removed automatically, and one of them is death, and one of them is resignation. So those are contemplated in the research documents that we put together. And I also just wanted to make sure that people didn't miss that the section from our barriers and best practices document, the burden that was placed on volunteers, the things that were identified under included what we wrote in that section was board compensation, time, training, and mental health, which are all things that got brought up during our discussion earlier. So we do have our own wisdom to help guide us on those points. Thanks.
Thank you, Co-Chair Dan. Okay, then we can pass to reviewing the next document, and I will pass it to Co-Chair Aji.
Okay, now it's actually my turn.
Thank you.
So let me wait for, okay, cool. So now the agenda and scope for oversight staff is what we've been saying, even though it says oversight agency. We'll be talking about staff of new board, the agency director, qualifications, including hiring process, authority, performance reviews, Then talk about staff structure and this question of will existing staff like IPRA, IA, et cetera, get preference to apply? And then Inspector General or Police Auditor with full access to Bureau records, trainings, and staff. And attorneys on staff with local, state, and federal specializations. Position within a city, budget at least 5% of PPP budget. The office location, so where does it exist to be? Is it freestanding? And then where in the city org chart or bureau structure is the board housed? And I will pass it to Co-Chair Handelman.
Thank you. And just as a point of information, the question about the preference to apply, that we sort of flagged that as something that's probably going to be in the transition phase, which is the next phase, phase five. So our subcommittee, don't worry about that. I'm glad I don't have to be the person deciding that. Oh, I might have to be. Okay. Anyway, so here's the stuff we pulled out, the other jurisdictions document that we approved as a full commission. I'll start with A5. It says the oversight body has a staff unit focused on policy, and that came out of the policy subsection. In F, which was all about staff, F1, it says that the oversight body manages and conducts reviews of, I think, the executive director of the oversight agency, and in some cases can hire and fire that person. That's interesting. A word missing. So, wow, we'd approved that document. That's okay. Everybody makes mistakes. F2, the oversight body hires, manages, and can choose to fire the top monitor or inspector general, which that's a position we have to think about too in our subcommittee. I skipped F3 about hiring and firing the chief because that's not something at this point that is under the scope of our board. F4, the oversight body has the authority to hire independent legal counsel. F5, the oversight agency has staff to support agency operations. And like Co-Chair Ojo said, if you have a question or something you want to interrupt and ask a question, that's fine. I'm just sort of looking down at my paper to read this instead of the screen. F6 says the oversight body staff are provided adequate training for their roles. F7 says the oversight system may reach outside city structures to complete its work, and that we had one example of that in Albany where they worked with people at a school, a government law center. And then H is the budget. H1 says the oversight body has a publicly disclosed budget. H2 says the location of the office is independent and accessible to the community. That's the end of H. And then I is audit functions. I1, the oversight agency reviews all misconduct investigations to ensure they are complete before findings and discipline are determined. Then we have section W, and I want to thank staff too for flagging some of these sections that we didn't notice on the first pass through. Oversight agency community engagement. W1, the oversight body conducts public education on the role of the oversight system and community members' rights. So that specifically, it can be the agency, it can be the board, and it can be a combination. So that's another area where there's going to be overlap as in this community engagement question. W2, the oversight body engages with the community on how to improve police practices and policies. W3, the oversight body conducts education on their activities for new law enforcement personnel and bargaining unit representatives. I'll turn it back to Co-Chair Amici.
All right. So now in the matter of subject matter experts in terms of staff and budget, so in D1, it says the oversight body should have support from paid staff across the range of duties the oversight body is expected to perform. This is something recommended by NACOL. And there's something in the city of San Diego that happens with their oversight body staff. And then for D3, the oversight agency should include as a preference in staff recruitment that candidates have experience working with community. And this is something proposed by the Oakland Oversight Board staff. Specifically, that agency suggests candidates with public defense or civil rights backgrounds. And yeah, I'm going to pass it back to Co-Chair Handelman.
Thanks. So somehow or other, when we were putting the document together, we got barriers and best practices split up in two places. So I'm doing the first section, and I'll turn it back over to my co-chair after I get to this, and then the next subsection. Okay. So barriers and best practices, part one, section 18, and this is the same section, you may notice, that we just looked at in the board membership subcommittee. It talks about board compensation, time, training, and mental health for the volunteers, and that's because of the question of whether or not there's going to be paid reimbursement for the board members, which has to be considered by the staff subcommittee. Then the next subsection is kind of the notes to our future selves from the last phase about ideas about intake and assigning advocates, and that's a really big issue that our system is going to be so different from everybody else's because we're going to have these advocates, according to our proposal anyway. Investigations, who should be hired as investigators. Then the question I asked before about whether the board approves or writes the rules for the director and the staff. And mediation, the idea is to have at least one staff person who's dedicated to mediations. And in San Francisco, they have 130 mediators, but I don't think we need that many here. All right, back to you, Co-Chair.
All right. So in terms of complexity, so hours of operation, most city offices, including most of the city's current accountability system, operate between 8 and 5. So it's not very good for complainants with less flexible schedules who are often lower and middle income folks. So this is a barrier to participation, as well as receiving information and updates. And best practices are civilian staff involvement. So the current system has multiple avenues for frontline staff to be involved in the investigative process. For example, IPR staff can go directly to the scene of officer deadly force incidents. Additionally, civilian staff can complete intake and intake investigations. Staff can do mostly independent investigations and have nominal subpoena power for documents and people. And as far as the qualifications of investigators, the current system has experienced investigators. So IPR and IA investigators collaborate, they team up, they advise, they consult, they share information, knowledge, experience about how to conduct these investigations. And all of these investigators have prior investigative experience, including experience with sex abuse, homicides, criminal personnel, and administrative investigations.
Great. And then the two sections of the city charter that we pulled out are the one about the professional staff of the board, which says the board will hire the director, and this director will serve at the pleasure of the will and pleasure of the board, and that the director then hires the rest of the staff. And then the independent authority clause, which we've talked about a lot in this commission, but the reason I pulled that in here is because the last sentence is the physical office of the board shall be located outside of a Portland Police Bureau facility. That's specified in the charter, and that's one of the questions we're supposed to answer. Where is it going to be? Then I pulled also sections of this Portland City Code that refer to the way the staff functions right now. The first part talks about how the IPR director gets selected currently and some of the criteria for that. So that's 321040. 321050 says the director can appoint other staff and delegate their responsibilities to them. And 321060 talks about the facilities, which also says that they're going to be a location convenient for the public, separate from the bureau. So that's already in the city code. And then this last section about the budget, we talked about this very briefly at the beginning to sort of give us the overview of why we're having this joint meeting. That there's, the current budget for this IPR is about $3 million. And then the questions that we came up with to think about on the subcommittee, which is on our last page here, Co-Chair Amechi talked about the idea of doing outreach to create a pipeline of people, employees, and I think he meant also for the board members too. But we're the staff subcommittee, but thinking about a pipeline of bringing people in to engage people, education on rights. We should specify this about constitutional rights. Then comes my back of napkin calculations about how many complaints that the new board might be running into, and we thought about, you know, what workload the advocates might have, and maybe it might have 10 advocates with 28 clients a year. And we can talk, again, we're going to talk about this in detail. This kind of the numbers that I came up with by crunching them. How many investigators are there? Well, there's 14 currently in the system. We probably would want to double that because they don't investigate a lot of cases right now. They dismiss a lot. And they also say they're running short because when there's a lot of shootings and, oh, I don't know, forced use to protest, they don't have enough people to do it. So we want to make sure there's enough staff to cover all that kind of contingencies. And then our wild guess for the staff was 28 investigators, 10 advocates, a director and 2 deputies, an outreach person of mediation who also does mediation, policy and legal counsel, and 6 administrative staff. And I didn't account for if we're going to pay the mediators in there. So there's a lot more that we have to do about thinking. And then if you all decide that we want to pay board members full time, we're going to have to recalculate all of this. So let's stay in touch throughout this process. Thank you very much. If there's any questions, we'll take them now.
Thank you, Co-Chair Ajay and Co-Chair Dan. Is there any question about this discussion of this document? No. Yes, staff?
Yeah, thank you. So just to clarify for anyone who's considering, you know, the purpose of having the budget in there is to illustrate the question as opposed to actually the PAC is not deciding on the budget for the new system. And I think it's helpful maybe for the audience to know that, but also to know that to illustrate the nature of the questions that were being answered earlier. Did want to mention that there'll probably also be some information that we could receive that's a similar breakdown for how internal affairs is funded as well, and how it spends and divides up its money beyond. Obviously, there's some part of this as well is already in here, how many investigators they have, but there are other functions may also be helpful to know, and we can try and get that information for the subcommittee. Thank you.
Thank you, staff. Okay, and we can pass to the next item on the agenda. Is a discussion about briefings and who subcommittee members would like to hear from, invite in and be briefed by. Please imagine that you have enough meeting time to hear from everyone you want, and use this time to brainstorm. If the subcommittees end up having less time, then we can reach out and ask them for written information too. This discussion is going to be a round-robin discussion. So it's designed to have all members speak once and provide their ideas and thoughts on both questions. Each member has up to 2 minutes, and I'll be calling on members to speak. After everyone's spoken, we can move on. Then again, this discussion is round robin and is about briefings and who subcommittee members would like to hear from, invite in, and be briefed by. And remember our discussions guidelines. Who would like to start? Are there anyone that has an idea who would like to be? I can pass it. I can start calling people and see. Okay, yes. Commissioner Ajay and then Co-Chair Ajay and then Co-Chair Tirsa. Go ahead.
I'm not sure if I like fully understand like what the advocate position will be like, and so I was trying to think about, you know, a sort of analog job that we could find out information about, like in terms of workload. And, you know, I immediately thought to like victims advocates. I don't know if it would be similar enough to get useful information, but yeah, but maybe. So just throwing it out there.
No, that's perfect. That's exactly what this exercise is about. It's about storming any ideas that you think it will be beneficial to hear from this. Thank you, Commissioner Ajay. And Commissioner Tirsa?
I don't know if it would be possible and but a lot of the what was pulled during the research, the fact-finding phase, a lot of what is in the document, there's a lot of examples that were pulled from practices happening in San Diego. So I don't know if it would be possible to hear from someone working in San Diego or a board member in San Diego that we can just ask them questions that we may have. I don't know if actually someone from the fact-finding phase connected with someone from San Diego. I know that some commissioners did have communication with members from other jurisdictions in other cities.
Yeah, thank you, Co-Chair Tirsa. Yes, Co-Chair Dan was the one who talked to them. But yeah, we will take note of that. Thank you. Co-Chair, Commissioner Casey?
So to kind of respond to Commissioner Ajay's point, I know someone who I'd be happy to refer staff to who has worked as a victim advocate pretty extensively, and also I think has sort of the interest in kind of non-police, non-carceral systems to go along with that, to be able to speak to the kind of differences that this position would potentially have to sort of a regular victim advocate position. So I think that would be a great presentation to have. I also think finding some people who are doing work in restorative justice right now, I think they're doing really similar things of trying to build new systems around making sure people are supported and advocated for in those ways. And then the other idea that I had, just kind of to get into some of the nitty gritty questions of how is this, agency going to relate to its board. I used to work for the Oregon Criminal Justice Commission, and that's another group that is overseen by a commission of people, but is, has a director and a staff and everything that works under them and advises them and gives them the information they need. So I'm sure if we reached out to them, they'd be willing to have someone come speak to us just about how that sort of dynamic plays out in, I think this will be, they are smaller than this is going to be, but I found them to be a pretty sort of effective body with a similar construction.
Thank you, Commissioner Casey. Next, Commissioner Dan, Co-Chair.
Yeah, that reminds me, Commissioner Iona, feel free to jump in since you know more about this than I do, but there is already a system here in Portland that has a volunteer community board that hires their staff, which is Prosper Portland, used to be the PDC. So, and there are rules that are built around that and how they hire them and who gets to tell who what to do. So I'll ask Commissioner Iona to add more to that.
Thank you, Commissioner Dan and Co-Chair Dan. Commissioner Debbie?
Yeah, there's 5 of them appointed by for Prosper Portland, appointed by the mayor with city council confirmation, I think. But then once they're in there, they run the show. I mean, they have the authority to hire everybody. I think they mostly hire the director and then delegate. And they're kind of a parallel example as far as independence from the city bureaucracy. So they used to even have their own legal department, but that changed some. And I think they have their own HR department. So they really they have, I think right now they have 80 something. At last I heard they had about 80 something employees. So bigger than what our group will be, but it's kind of similar. So yeah, so that might be a good source of how do you run something within the city of Portland that's kind of independent of the city itself.
Thank you, Commissioner Debbie. Commissioner Angie?
I don't think I have as much to comment on. I'm sorry. Thank you.
It's okay. I'm gonna then send it to Commissioner Monica.
Yeah, I don't have ideas of who I would want to come invite. I have thoughts about, I was looking at the flow chart of how complaints are going to go down into the funnel of all those colors and all those boxes that Dan and that subcommittee put together. You know, the board is showing up in a lot of those steps. And I'm imagining that subcommittees of the board will be in charge of like the intakes part of things, and another subcommittee will be in charge of this other step. And if this board is going to be very big, is there a board presently working that is big, that has several subcommittees that work in different aspects of their job, but then also meets regularly once a month to make the big decisions, like to make the big decisions on discipline, right? I'm having a really hard time figuring out how this board is going to work out, because there's got so many things to do and they're volunteers, and I'm worried about that. You know, that's what I'm trying to reconcile inside my brain.
Thank you, Commissioner Monica. Commissioner Obi?
Yeah, I don't have too much to add. I really like the idea of talking to the guys in San Diego and seeing how they do. And just to the point said, the kind of hierarchical relationship between the staff and board is going to pose, I guess, some questions. So we'll definitely keep in contact between the two subcommittees about like maybe slight changes where there's like maybe an in between, or someone who's like kind of a staff member, like but relays things to the board on a more on a basis of like more than just during these meetings, or more than just like emails, just so there's a bit of a link where the board doesn't get overburdened and yet doesn't just do whatever the staff says, and there's discussion between the two groups. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Obi. Commissioner Cameron?
I'm not sure if I have a whole lot to contribute right this moment, but thank you guys.
Thank you. Thank you. I know, Commissioner, Dan, you wanna answer Commissioner Monica. You can do it briefly, that way we can move on because it's 8:56.
Understood. That's why I said if there's time. Thank you very much. So just to kind of rewrap our minds around that flow chart that you were talking about, the intake is done by the staff, not the board members. The hearings will be done by a subset of the board, so not the whole board. In theory, the way we've designed the flow right now, would never be hearing a case all at one time. It will only be 5 or 7, or maybe a slightly larger number, but never the whole board necessarily meeting out the discipline. That would be a hearings panel of the board, and there would be appeals panels too. So it would not be everybody doing all the intake and all the dealing with every step of the way. Does that help allay your fears a little bit? Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. We can continue thinking about, and once you think about somebody or an institution, please send an email. Just continue thinking who will be great to hear from. The next item on the agenda is next steps, and I will pass it to staff, then we will do public comment.
Yeah, thank you. So, excuse me, the next meeting of the subcommittee on board membership, I'll do this in 2 parts. The next meeting on the subcommittee on board membership is it's a week from today, Thursday, March 9th. In addition to just reading all of the documents that have been shared, which is the certainly a known task that would be very helpful for members to do, and to get prepared for it, just wanted to ask if co-chairs Obi or Tirsa had anything particular that they wanted members to focus on from now until then.
What I think we might do, and I'll talk to Co-Chair Tiers about this, but maybe we'll kind of segment into specific portions of our, I think, the 9 things we have listed, and then just look things up generally. Then we can see if we can get someone on the docket for another meeting. But yeah, probably splitting up into little pairs, not going over quorum in our group, and then the kind of reporting back. I think that kind of worked last time, or last co-chair, last subcommittee as well.
I agree with co-chair Obi. I'm thinking perhaps we can split into 2 groups. One will look at specifically board memberships, number of members in the board, qualifications, recruitment, representation of specific impacted communities and the onboarding process. And then the other group can look at the selection and replacement of board members, the appointment process, term lengths, renewability, training, quorum, and removal requirements. But I'm sure Obi and I will send out an email pretty soon once we connect.
Thank you, Co-Chair Tirsa and Co-Chair Obi. Staff?
Yeah, and for the other subcommittee, it may be worth noting, I'm using the phrase oversight agency. It'll probably have another name by the time, very soon. But with relation to the subcommittee currently known as oversight agency, the many of the things that are mentioned with relation to mentioned during today's meeting are actually likely to fall under that subcommittee, the way that the commission approved the creation of these subcommittees. So there are a couple of things that, yes, it relates to the board members may have, may or may not have some sort of input or approval process for policy issued by the director, for example. That's a process that would be written about and determined most likely in the oversight agency subcommittee. Not necessarily in both, but collaboration and communication is definitely positive, just based off of the document that you approved on February 9th, which created the subcommittees, which I can screen share again if it's helpful. But for that one, it'll have a little bit longer before its next meeting, which is going to be March 13th. That is not the coming Monday, but the Monday after that, 11 days from today. And just to ask the question here of co-chairs of that subcommittee, are there any particular things other than reading the documents that have been discussed and screen shared today that you would like members to do from now until then? And that's to co-chairs Ajay and Dan, sorry.
My brain is shutting off, so I'm not thinking of anything right now, but I don't know. But it's probably something.
I'm with you. I'm glad we got to this part of this meeting. No, we'll definitely have communications with our subcommittee folks between now and the next meeting. And like when I was co-chair in the last phase, I want to make sure that we communicate and collaborate, and that's a goal I have again for this phase. So we'll reach out to everybody in between meetings. We'll figure stuff out. Thanks.
Thank you, and that's all I have. So I'll pass it back to Victoria.
Thank you, staff. We will now take open public comment on the issues of the subcommittees discussing. Our community members can also tell their story about policing and police accountability. We ask members of the public to keep their comments or questions to 2 minutes in length and raise their hand in Zoom if you like to speak. And I have one person for the wants to public comment, Mr. Jum Delegado. Welcome. Thank you for being here. You can talk now. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Yume Delegado, I'm the vice chair of the CRC. So currently doing some of the duties that you all are contemplating. I'll try and keep it short because I know it's late. I think the main thing I would like to share or offer my perspective on is that I think based on the amount of work that we do, this should be a paid position. That being said, I would strongly encourage you to consider keeping this a volunteer position or a position that has a stipend rather than a salary. And my reasoning for this is twofold. I think one, I think we risk creating a professional class by creating a paid staff. And I think that has its own valence, as its own self-interest, right? Two, I think that the city, the citizens, the people that we serve look to us to do this because we want to and not because it's a paycheck. I think the other thing that I am already starting to hear that I guess I feel informed on is that, you know, this is a board that's going to be chosen by the city council, right? It's going to be chosen by politicians. I'm already hearing words like professionalism and requirements and qualifications being thrown around. And I think how you interpret that and how city council will interpret that are two very different things. I don't come from a traditional educational background. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a civil servant. I do think my perspective is valuable, and I hope my contributions have been. But a city council that was looking to appoint someone to a salaried position where the public needs to get their money's worth is going to look at someone like myself or someone like many of you, you find people and say, well, they're not attorneys, they're not prosecutors, they're not whatever, right? They may have a different life experience. So I really think you have to be careful about that. That said, I do think that there's a huge barrier to entry to doing this work. And so some form of compensation, whether that's following what the governor does for the governor's boards, where they're paid per meeting that they attend or per day that they have to work, or whether it's a stipend. I think those are good ideas. But I think if you create a you know, $90,000 a year job, you're going to get people who want to do this job for the money, right? Just a couple of other very brief observations. There's a lot of talk about uplifting staff, letting them make recommendations. I have great respect for the people who work for IPR. I work closely with them. That being said, viewing this through the lens of what the citizenry of Portland will see, by very nature, the people that you will have to hire as your investigators and your directors will probably be people from a legal or policing background. You have to have people who are skilled enough and have the requisite sort of criminal justice experience to interview police officers and find out if they are engaged in wrongdoing. I think, broadly speaking, really trying to emphasize the voices of people who are essentially in part of that policing environment is probably not something that the public will necessarily have a lot of faith in, right? So I appreciate IPR staff. I appreciate the investigators. I think they sign up to do a very hard job that nobody particularly appreciates at this juncture, right? That being said, I don't think I would be trying to put Ross at IPR or any of the investigators front and center just because they're feds, for lack of a better term. So I think that's one perspective I would add. I also think that you all should consider some guardrails for how those appointments are made by city council. Again, I don't know that I would get appointed by the current city council. Obviously, they did a very good job of appointing the people on the PAC. So I'm not saying that their judgment is completely invalid, but I think it's something to consider. And then lastly, just one thing that occurs to me, which may be outside the scope of this current body, but someone somewhere should be thinking of the fact that if this is going to be housed outside of police facilities, and I heard somewhere outside of city facilities, that $12 million budget, a lot of it may end up going to infrastructure unless there's a separate provision for that. So I don't think y'all want to be renting, but buying a building in Portland is going to be pretty pricey. So I don't know which body needs to think about that, but at some point, that is a conversation that needs to be had if there's a separate allocation or if there's an amortization schedule for that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Delgado. We really appreciate your comments. Thank you very much. Now we're gonna move to the next item on the agenda is the garden plot recap. This is time for facilitators, co-chairs, and the staff to summarize any items already brought up today which didn't fit into today's agenda. We recap those items here and use them in developing future agendas. We won't be using this time to add new agendas, new items not previously mentioned, or to discuss any items, but we will use this list to develop future agendas so these items can be addressed. I will call the co-chairs if they have any items for garden plot, any of these the co-chairs.
Nope. I mean, I remember there was something that, yeah, Commissioner Handelman mentioned earlier, so I'll hand it to you.
Thank you, Co-Chair.
Well, I mean, what I was going to say is what came up in the early part of the meeting, we were talking about our schedule, where we might have a Tuesday and Saturday meeting, is that our our timeline is very important, and at some point it would be great to brief all of you on what happened in court with Judge Simon and what happened at City Council on Wednesday. So I want to make sure that either that gets discussed now or sometime in the near future. Thanks. Okay. And Co-Chair Amechi, if there's something that I forgot, thanks. Please remind me.
Thank you, Co-Chair Dan.
Yeah, it was something that we were going to revisit. It was a question. Maybe it was the question of the preference to apply. I don't know.
I guess. Thank you. Staff?
Yeah, there are two things that were noted, and if maybe at the end of this, if I can add another comment after anyone else has garden plot to respond to what Co-Chair Dan just brought up. But the two things were, one was exactly as was just mentioned, preference to apply possibly needing to be adjusted from this phase of work into the next phase of work, because it has to do with something that would likely be only at the beginning, because after that they wouldn't be IPR or internal affairs, well, possibly internal affairs staff. But and then secondly, something that Commissioner Debbie brought up, which was with relation to talking to the Bureau of Human Resources about multiple items.
Thank you. Thank you, staff. Co-chairs Obi or Tirsa, do you have something for the garden plot?
I do not.
Thank you.
Nothing for me either. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. I will ask Corinne for the facilitator if you have something for the garden plot.
No, I do not.
Thank you. As a reminder, you can now submit advanced public comments to the Police Accountability Commission via web form, voicemail, or postal mail. Thank you to all the members who attended today's meeting and for your contributions today. I'm sorry, staff, you wanted to comment something about Commissioner Dan?
Yeah, just the date thing. There is a potential of having, staff has had to ask members to give their input as to whether or not a third meeting a week should be on Tuesdays, Saturdays, or another option. And while that survey is going on, that's why there's some ambiguity about the fact that it's the 25th or possibly the 27th, 28th. The reason that might be necessary is to achieve a deadline that is still under consideration by City Council. Co-chairs presented a quarterly report to City Council on yesterday, and that included the formal presentation of the request. So should that change, then the timeline will change if the City Council does adjust the timeline for the PAC. And if not, then yeah, we would look at having to schedule a meeting of a subcommittee on either Saturday the 25th or Tuesday the 28th. That's why there's some ambiguity there. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, staff. We want to continue. Thank you, everyone, especially the interpreters. And finally, thank you to all the members of the community for attending and contributing with your thoughts and questions. If you are not already signed up for emails updates, please also sign up to receive updates from the PAC. The next meeting of the subcommittee on board membership is March 9. The next meeting of the subcommittee and oversight agency is March 13. It's now 9:12 and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.